So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our fifth live lecture, and thank you also for watching it later if that is the case. Thank you so much for those that are currently taking the time to join this lecture on economic geography. I wrongly said last lecture that today's lecture will have been about EU integration or founding schemes or cohesion policy within the European Union, but I forgot that first we have this lecture on economic geography, which is actually quite important to step towards the next two lectures. And the participants are still joining, so I reinforce here the welcome to everybody joining regional geography of Southern Europe. And the next two lectures, the two final lectures of the year, will be focused on the European Union and the impacts of their policies and founding schemes and principles, sometimes discourses in other cases, influence on Southern European countries, the four countries that we have been primarily focused on. And the goal is to do a double recording do the live lecture next week on the 8th, and then my goal is to do a recording of the lecture on the 15th. So this lecture will be only recorded and not a live lecture because of other professional commitments that I have, and I cannot. I'm unable to postpone them. So the recording will be available probably also next week. That's my goal. Let's see how this will go. And if you have any questions regarding structure, organization, or some other issue that is making you uncomfortable, you know where to find me. You can also come through voice or through chat. And today we'll continue where we left last time. And it is important that I recap the previous lecture, and is also important because it paves the way for the today's lecture and the two next lectures. And just a double checking on the technical component here. Seems that everything is set. So I talked a lot about these Southern European countries are located between the conformative and the performative planning, but I was not able to explore what this actually mean in practice. And the countries we are focused on this module, Portugal, Greece, Italy, and Spain, they are here positioned in between, what I call between conformity and performity. We cannot fully say that they are leaving the conformative tradition of spatial planning to enter a more performative. They are within what we call balance of these two main approaches, but they are all located within these more market-led development perspectives. And the paper I shared with you earlier underlines this very specifically. And this market-led means embracing more this multi-level territorial governance approach, and the principles of it we explored earlier on, and also be more open to the promotion of private investments and to be more open to the influence of private actors within the spatial planning of their urban regions and the territories in general, national level and local level included. So the slide next summarizes this conformative and performative planning approach. The conformative is almost as the name says, it entails a more rigid approach to this planification of the territories. Is the most traditional, as the authors point out, the most traditional, widespread in Europe, and is about locating land use and spatial development rights through a more preventive, what I call defensive, binding land use zone. So brings a more restrictive approach to requests from, for example, developers, real estate agents to develop a parcel of land. So there are a number of documents called plans and guidelines, spatial policies that determine what can be built and what cannot be built, and where these builds can take place, and the activities that can unfold in those new locations. So it understands or imposes some more rigidity within the planification of cities and urban regions. So this has been quite common across southern European countries, particularly because in terms of spatial planning traditions, these four countries, they have been developing essentially urban planning, and you will read this in the literature. They have a strong tradition in urban planning. So planning was mainly dedicated to planification of core urban areas, of urbanized places, cities, primarily cities. The discourse of urban regions like center, urbanized locations and the surrounding area was not part of the dictionary of planning interventions in Southern Europe. With the integration in the European Union, the things start changing, and the territorial approach, as the other uh, um, paper I shared with you underlines, this territorial discourse enters the planification, the planning activity within Southern Europe. Means not only planning for urbanized territories, but planning with an integrated perspective in mind, involving the more or less urbanized areas in the surrounding of cities. And then the discourse of urban regions came into force, and many of the plans currently in force, they cover not only the urbanized area, but the surrounding municipalities, that some of them, they are highly rural, or they are placed within a rural context. The performative one, putting it simple, of course, there's a lot of conceptualization here, but putting it simple is presents a more flexible approach to the planning of cities and urban regions. It's initially emerged in the UK, in Ireland, and also as well as in Ireland, as an approach more open to integrate some of the requests from the private sector, and I'm here especially focused on real estate agents, landowners, and land developers. So it embodies as a more non-binding zoning. So they do have plans, they do have land use plans with determining zoning. So here, this parcel of land, it can only be utilized for housing, another one for industry, another one for services, but they also embrace some flexibility to fit the needs that come up in certain moments of time. So they play here the give and take. They use the negotiation, and they embrace more this governance approach within the planning of their territories. So conformative, slightly more rigid than the performative one. They both, in both cases, or the countries that embrace this approach, they both have plans, they both have spatial policies, legislation. But in the conformative one, these legally binding documents somehow hinder or block private actors to do whatever they want. In the performative approach, they can do not necessarily whatever they want, but they have more room for negotiation with the public actors, with the public authorities, governments, local governments. So that's what I bring to you today is less about the past that you can read in specific literature, but more about what is going on at the present, and then the document, the publication I shared, reflects precisely that. So we are, let's look at Southern Europe. These four countries, they now embrace a less rigid, less binding approach to spatial planning. They have been trying to engage more the citizens in the planning process, as well as the private actors. So they still are placed in terms of or based on a number of indicators that this researcher here came to analyze within the conformity planning model, but they have what they call here some specific variants, or they use other devices, they use other planning instruments, for example, strategic spatial planning, somehow more flexible, with a long-term perspective, more open to governance arrangements in their planification. So they use these, what the authors call variants. I will translate these as they embrace other type of planning approach, slightly more flexible, to accumulate also requests from the private sector, and also to respond to needs, for example, in terms of social housing, in terms of increase in the mobility patterns, or the need to satisfy the commuting patterns that suddenly increase because of migration and other factors as well. And they give the example, although a bit old in time, the Turin city plan that suffered throughout the years about 400 variations in its form. So it shows how a country such as Italy, placed within the conformative model, more rigid, more binding, was able to upgrade permanently and eventually fulfill some of their needs, the needs of Turin city, about 400 times. And this is an example of Italy, but also occurs in Spain, Portugal, and Greece. So I try then to bring some of these overall general remarks covering the Southern Europe. I think this is more important. And bear in mind that many other specifications on the spatial planning system, they exist in these 4 countries, and it will take probably one entire module of 11 lectures to explain in very high detail the spatial planning in these countries. So overall remarks here and next. This spatial planning in Southern Europe, what we see today is the result of what part of the literature calls it path development within the path dependence within spatial planning. That means, in simple words, they continue to follow what they know what to follow. So they embrace a traditional approach to planning, and in some other colleagues of mine, they call it consolidated planning practice. They remain rather rigid in their tradition of spatial planning, and how they deal with the planification and with the territorial development. So these 4 countries, they have been evolving towards a less rigid administrative burden within spatial planning. Their goal was to turn spatial planning a more flexible manner and a more flexible component of their regional and territorial developments. And they also embrace a more fast planning approach, being more open to projects. And most of these projects, they receive funding from them, from the European Union. So they started embracing a more flexible approach within their spatial planning, which aligns very much with the turn to territorial governance that emerged essentially after their integration in the European Union. And I would like to quote here some of a quotation from this article here, but in the next slide I will do that. So overall remarks here: these countries have been reducing the administrative burden regarding decision-making involving spatial planning, and they aim to facilitate procedures, and this will lead to an increase in terms of urban development, in terms of housing offer, in terms of housing offer in these across their urban regions. And even though, for example, Portugal, a country with only two main areas of administration, the national and the local, they also embrace this more flexible approach to spatial planning. And then we'll see next how they do that. They do that through what some of the literature calls soft spaces. So doing planning outside of commonly administrative areas. I don't know if this sounds clear. So aligning the approach within the European Union principles, spatial planning went from being commonly done at the national and local level, for example, municipalities, well-defined administrative boundaries, to embrace soft spaces. So a number of territories, they were merged within the spatial planning system, somehow improvised to accumulate or to respond to some of the calls of the European Union for more cooperation involving municipalities, or cooperation involving municipalities and the private sector. So the planning system follow this trajectory of governance discourse within the administration of the territories in Southern Europe. And putting it in some sort of a map, a summary, we have Southern Europe within the conformative planning system that results from this consolidated planning practice, but with a number of mechanisms, spatial planning instruments, if you will, variations that place them in between a conformative and a performative. So more flexible, more open to citizen participation, more open to the participation of private actors. And this is somehow also a reflection of what is going on in other parts of Europe. Although in some of these countries, this openness, this flexibility was already, or has been in place already for quite some time, and it's still rather new in the southern parts of Europe. And some of the what is still common in terms of governance in southern Europe remains within the spatial planification. So the centralized the governments, mainly in Portugal, they still want to play a stronger role in the planifications, although the European Union calls for this horizontal, for example, involving different municipalities, and vertical, involving municipalities and the private sector. The central government still plays a role in the overall spatial planification. However, an overarching conclusion of these spatial planning systems in Southern Europe can be encapsulated here within the term Europeanization. And this means in simple words, the influence of the European Union policies, principles, decision-making within the planification, within the spatial planning of Southern Europe, similar as in other countries. And how Europeanization happens at the ground, or in concrete terms. These authors tell that Europeanization of planning predominantly occurs in between, that is, across sectors, so not only involving physical planning of infrastructures, but also economic aspects. That's somehow justifies why we have economic geography coming up. Across government levels, I mentioned to you, between national, regional, and national levels. This depends very much on the territorial governance of each country. And across administrative boundaries, it involves not only the national government, secretaries of state within this national government, but also municipalities, sub-levels of local administrations, such as parishes or small towns. They are now playing a role in spatial planning across Southern Europe, similar than in comparison to other parts of Europe. The European Union welcomed soft spaces, means these non-administrative territories, and planning with open arms, and they become an important tool in its crusade to foster territorial cohesion. So that's the goal here of this Europeanization of territorial administration, let's put it like this, territorial governance and spatial planning. And what these other authors here call is that although the European Commission as no specific domain based on the treaty signed within among the countries to rule spatial planning, has assumed the role as regulator, going well beyond the role of coordination and harmonization acknowledged in the treaty. So the guidelines, different policies and decision makings coming from the European Union in this regarding, justified with the aim of building a cohesive European territory. They went far beyond what has been agreed in these treaties. In some domains, this results in positive aspects for the citizens, for example, in terms of more or less uniformized transportation system across Europe. But in many others, it's also favor or continue to favor high-income countries of the European Union, and neglected to some extent, lagging behind regions of Southern Europe mainly. But doing planning also in this more open, flexible context, it still a rather complicated process. This is an example of how planning will unfold in Portugal, for example. So I put here at the top, this is the result of a previous work of mine. European Union at the top as somehow as not only as a coordinator anymore, they are currently playing the role more as a providing a guidance, and even not only as a guidance, but imposing to some extent some of these or influencing what happens in the lower levels of decision making. So when the European Union came up within the previous multi-annual financial framework that ended in 2020 with the EU Strategy 2020 and other policies within the financial framework, this somehow imposed to the European Union member states a number of domains that they needed to follow, otherwise they wouldn't be able to apply for specific founding schemes. And this happens very much in Portugal, which led to all the municipalities, those 318 municipalities, to develop master plans. And the authors point out here that these municipalities, if they wanted to apply for the European structural funds or executing compulsory purchases in the public interest, they couldn't do that without an effective PDM, means a master plan at the municipal level. So that's how the things in terms of planning started working in the European Union. If they want to be able to apply for founding schemes within the European Union, they had first to prepare a master plan, and currently they need to prepare what is called more long-term planning, strategic spatial plans at intermunicipal level. As, for example, in Portugal, there is no regional level in administrative terms. So involves indeed bottom-up approach, because the municipalities, they need to be involved at the bottom of the planification, but it's also very much a top-down, because they will be somehow blocked of progressing in their intents if they do not fulfill what comes from the European Union. And what you see here in this axis of the main corridors, all of this extreme of the arrows is Europeanization. And if someone listens to me later and can criticize me for putting this straightforward, but all these axes here, they are more in favor of the rest of the European Union, the Iberian Peninsula and further on, than in favor of for example, the countryside of Portugal. All of these axes, Samir, they are here because precisely they want to feel the calls from the European Union to accelerate cooperation across territories, to embrace territorial governance, to pave the way for a wider integration of the European Union member states. And these are partly transportation corridors. And interestingly, to underline here, a lot of aspects could be highlighted here. We still you can see an emphasis on the spatial planning in the coast of Portugal, mainly between the two largest metropolitan areas, then the two only metropolitan areas, if I remember the earlier lecture, Porto in the north and Lisbon, the capital, in the south. So a lot of urban development that is taking place along the coast, the Atlantic coast, and much less development or planification towards the countryside. And here they embrace in this domain an approach also from the European Union spatial development policy of the concentration or centralized or decentralized concentration, that is creating urban centers in the countryside that can then work as an anchor to attract services and economic activities, for example. So that's what I point out here. This is decentralized concentration. So the goal is to somehow decentralize not only powers in terms of administration, but capacity to attract foreign investment or investment from at the national level to other centers in the countryside. So that's the goal of this regional spatial development plan. Although in the country without a regional administration, they work essentially, they still follow that planning tradition in investing more on urbanized areas, even in the countryside of the territory. And all this structure here in between that these authors call soft planning, I will bring it close to this now performative approach. So an approach that is between the conformative and the performative within the planning systems. And all of these, what they call policy tools, integration, integrative territorial development, and other approach, they are this diagram shows this Europeanization within the spatial planning system of Portugal. So we have the conformative one, the legally binding, the statutory planning tools, for example, the master plan at the municipal level. We have the regional one and the national one, those two I shared with you earlier. And we have here the soft spaces, the intermunicipal communities I mentioned to you earlier. They somehow fill the gap of the lack of a solid and sound regional administration, but they do not have a legal administrative body. They are not directly elected by the citizens. They are the result of governance. They are now playing a role in terms of the spatial planning. This is the result of the Europeanization of spatial planning in a country of Southern Europe, and similar examples happened or unfold in other parts of Europe. Going into more detail in terms of planification, for example, in the metropolitan area of Lisbon, it very much follow the consolidated planning practice in terms of urban planning in such an urbanized territory. But the caveat here is again the Europeanization and the integration of more economic activities within the physical planning. That's also the general tendency across Europe as well as Southern Europe of embracing more economic activities within an overarching spatial planning approach. So we have common, for those that studied spatial planning earlier on, a common diagram integrated in a spatial plan, and we have and also in a diagram trying to envision how or what kind of activities should be consolidated in this planning. And we have at the center something curious, entrepreneurial fabric. This is certainly something new, very uncommon in the countries embracing a more conformative approach, very rigid towards spatial planning. So they incorporate innovation, economic activities such as tourism, of course, a domain in terms of sustainable development, more on the side of ecological values, with the goal of quality of life. So a traditional spatial planning approach, such as the one in Portugal, more conformative, start to being disentangled towards more multi-sector, multi-government approach in the overall, embracing the overall goal of territorial development. And because I've been mentioning to you that comparisons are always important, and if you question yourself, okay, I'm showing an example of Lisbon, is closer to my own experience in terms of research, but this happens also in other European, in other countries in Southern Europe, as well as in other European countries, even outside of the European Union. For example, we have an example of Oslo here, highly, which they also embrace a decentralized concentration with the goal of creating multiple urban centers in the surrounding of Oslo, also with this axis connecting the main city to other urban areas in the urban region of Oslo, Akershus, that's the name. So in terms of how a plan looks like, they are very similar across Europe, and I could bring many other examples. And I bring another one from the southern Europe, from Italy, from Firenze, and sometimes that's a very curious aspect, and then for some of us very interesting to explore, is how they idealized, or the word, the correct word is how they envisioning the planification in of their cities. And here we have, I don't know if you remember the finger plan in Copenhagen, that if their development follows exactly the shape of the hand with 5 fingers, and these five fingers are 5 transportation corridors that connect all the surrounding area to the center of Copenhagen. Here they develop more this perspective of this metaphorical image of the development of Firenze with a central unity, centralized urban area, and the connection with the other urban, peri-urban areas within the largest urban region of Firenze. So we have very common grounding in terms of planification across across Southern Europe. And I have here some two possible exam questions. I already bring a number of them earlier on, and this try to summarize the previous lessons. I maybe it will be interesting to for example ask you to characterize based on this specific publication that you have access to it, to characterize spatial planning in Southern Europe. And so I will expect you to answer that although they are placed within a more conformative model that is more rigid, based on legally binding documents, legally binding spatial plans, solid or well elaborated land use plans with very specific goals in terms of what this parcel of land, the destiny of this parcel of land, because of the Europeanization and this discourse going from government to governance, they are currently embracing also principles that could be assigned to a more performative model that is common in other parts of Europe, mainly in the Nordic countries and Central Europe. And you will have this document, this publication of the European planning studies that could help you to answer briefly to these questions. And so I conclude a part of the spatial planning, and we have some time for questions before the break, and then we'll enter the economic geography part, which we still can do before the break. Do you have any questions regarding the spatial planning? So please feel free to come up with some questions or some thoughts or something you would like to see a bit more clarified. So some key remarks. Try to align this lecture on the spatial planning with earlier on with this transition somehow from government to governance, more or stronger cooperation involving well-defined administrative territories such as municipalities, national level, regions in the cases of for example, Spain or Italy, with the so-called soft spaces of planning, space that do not have an administration, a territorial administration, but they still can join forces, procedures, and come together in one spatial planning. And currently, these spatial plans they are far beyond what we will define traditional spatial planning. They involve a number of economic activities. They involve also research and development. They have overarching goals of improving the quality of life, of securing sustainable development in the three sectors: social, economic, and ecological. So these are overarching conclusions of spatial planning in Southern Europe. All right. So, and I take this as a starting point for the economic geography of Southern Europe. The fact that the planification or the spatial planning tries to integrate now a wide range of sectors, including including economic activities. And this is common now, or more common in Southern Europe as well as in other parts of the European Union. And but before entering more specifically on what this economic geography of Southern Europe looks like, is important to underline what actually economic geography takes care of. Probably some of you have attended earlier lectures on economic geography or evolutionary economic geography. Somehow that's how we approach it in Kiel. And basically, and also putting it simple, economic geography is about understanding the economy, economic activities, how these economic activities are organized in a specific territory. So basically, it's about the organization of the economic landscape. That's the kind of terminology I prefer to approach here. So it's about the where, the why, and the what kind of questions that come when we try to understand economic organization of a certain territories, being them national states, regions, and or urban areas. It is certainly more than identifying, for example, the main economic activities or the main economic powers in each country. it may entail some of this analysis, very simplified, but the goal within economic geography is going beyond this identification of economic activities in a specific location. Is about understanding the flows, the networks, how these specific companies came to be located in this country. Is important to understand factors and areas of influence that lead these companies to be located where they are. And here you can already see some of the main companies across Southern Europe. But then my goal within this economic geography component of regional geography of Southern Europe is go beyond this identification of the main enterprises in each country. So when we are talking about economic geography within a specific territory, for example, Southern Europe, it's important to understand who plays the key role in the organization of this economic landscape. It's important to understand that these players, they are not static, they evolve through time. So the actors that are currently playing a stronger card in the organization of the economic activities, they probably suffer some evolution. It's important to undertake this evolution when approaching economic geography. It's very important to look at the context, and this implies understanding institutions, the role of institutions, understanding the role of the national state, understanding what kind of decision-making capacity regions, for example, hold in terms of economic activities. And it's also important to understand the overall governance context, not only the national, but also if these geographies are embedded within supranational institutions, such as the European Union, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, for example. So studying economic geography within a specific geography, a specific territory, it implies understanding fluxes, negotiations, networks, arrangements involving multiple actors, public and private. And most of them, sorry about this. And most of them, they need to follow some specific guidelines. There's legislation to follow. There are a number of plans, sectorial plans for a different kind of activities. And in some cases, that as it occurred in the 4 countries that we are focused in this model, they also suffer the intervention of these supranational institutions, such as after the crisis in 2008, through the hands of the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, European Central Bank, that support their recovery. So in terms of a theoretical perspective within economic geography, we tend to involve to engage more with this evolutionary perspective. So we understand that the organization of the economic landscape is essentially the result of an evolution through time. So history matters when we try to understand current situations, current organization of production and consumption patterns within one specific territory. And again, a relational component, understanding the actors involved within this organization, as well as the role institutions play in this context. So in the end, economic geography is not only the result of an economic approach to the organization of the economic landscape of certain geographies, but we have to look at the social components, we have to look at the human geography, we have to understand the territorial governance of that geography, we have to understand also how they embrace sustainability even more, how they embrace spatial planning, if it's more in the rigid approach, more in a performative approach towards a long-term perspective, and also understanding the role of these economic activities in terms of regional development. And yeah, 2 slides before the break, and then we will then, after the break, enter the more specific context of Southern Europe. And so this basically summarizes what I've been mentioned to you, that economic geographers in their research or in support of policy making, some of them, they strongly support policy making, for example, at European level. They do not only aim to understand the where of the things, but also how these these relations, this evolution through time, the role of institutions, so all these components of regional economic geography, what role they play in how the economic landscape is currently presented and currently unfolds in the real context. I will not be embracing a more theoretical approach in this in the second part of the lecture. I aim to bring more practical examples. I think these are more relevant to you, and because I don't know exactly your backgrounds to bring massive theoretical concepts from economic geography. So hopefully you will enjoy the lecture, the second part of the lecture on economic geography in Southern Europe, and then I will start with these also overall conditions influencing the economic geography of Southern Europe. So we will do now a break here, and we'll see each other about in 10 minutes. And I can stay here if you have some questions, and but you are of course free to go to grab a drink or take some fresh air. So I will see you in 10 minutes. Continue our lecture. Thank you so much for bringing these questions. So we are for those that were outside, we are discussing about the importance of reflecting on the role, some less clear or less legal actions of private actors and their influence in terms of spatial planning. So we now embrace a more economic geography aspect of the Southern Europe, and again I remain focused on the four countries of Europe, with a promise of bringing something else later on in the lectures, in the final lecture or before the final lecture, trying to cover other sub-geographies of Southern Europe. And again, what I cover here in this economic geography second part of the lecture is only one domain of economic geography. You could have explored many other domains. You can focus only on research and developments. I decided not to focus on that because we have a lecture to cover only on research and developments. That's the first lecture of next year. Then cross-border relations, we will also talk about that. You could talk about sustainability. You could talk about information communication technology, for example, related to economic activities. You could focus on one specific activity. I decided to somehow juggle here with different aspects. I bring some text, I bring some maps, and hopefully we'll find these interesting. And I bring some general aspects at the beginning. So when we are talking about economic geography or the organization of the economic landscape in one specific geography, it's important to understand not only the economic activities, but other factors that can influence the economic activities, such as, for example, corruption, power relations. They certainly play a strong role in the organization of the economic activities. Understanding if the corporations that exist in specific geography. Together with that, it's also important to look at the more physical domains of the geography. And because of their geographical location, their physical geographical location, climate change, for example, will influence or is already influencing the economic landscape of Southern Europe. And this is important to keep in mind when we talk about economic geography of Southern Europe. They need water because one of across the four countries, one of their main activities, although not playing a stronger role in the GDP, is agriculture. They need water for fruit or for vegetables, such as in Spain. Global warming, the increase of the temperatures, which will certainly impact one of the main economic activities in Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece. That is tourism, a core activity across these four countries, mainly in Greece. So increase of the temperatures will certainly influence and require the number of reorganization of activities in Southern Europe. Extreme weather events, they are already influencing quite dramatically some of the cities in Southern Europe, and some of them depend heavily on the tourism activity to absorb labor force and to support the overall territorial development. There are a number of examples in Italy as well as in Greece. And all to cope with these possible impacts on economic activities. Territorial governance is needed, spatial planning is needed, stronger legislation in terms of environmental, reducing the environmental footprints of some of other economic activities are certainly needed to sustain economically Southern Europe as well as other countries. Another overall conclusion is that what we see today, or the analysis, the economic geography analysis we are doing today requires embracing this evolutionary perspective. So, and the lecture actually is not about economic geography, but is about evolution economic geography, because how, or the indicators, the economic indicators of these four countries in Southern Europe currently is highly influenced, or has been highly influenced by the post-crisis of 2008 that dramatically influenced the economic landscape of Southern Europe. It impacted the housing sector, it impacted the job sector, it made the unemployment rate skyrocket across the four countries. And then for them to recover from this economic crisis, highly financial, or highly the result of a disruption in the bank sector, requires them to embrace stronger structural reforms in many domains. And this has been also very much criticized in different academic articles and opinion articles in other media. Led them to implement stronger structural reforms that very much align with the neoliberal principles of the European Union and how European Union envisions the organization of the European territory. Some of these structural reforms actually played well in some of the countries, such as in Portugal. In other countries, it took some time for them to really engage with these with the effects of the structural reforms, such as in Greece, and all of these impacts that current economic landscape. Often Portugal is given as an example of how well they embraced the economic package coming from the European Union / European Central Bank / International Monetary Fund, how well they dealt with the economic package, and how well they dealt with the implementation of some of the structural reforms, for example, in the labor sector, that led them to be well positioned. This was somehow the scenario in time of crisis. We can see here a common pattern of a stagnation of the GDP and enormous public sector debt. That's not only a characteristic from the countries in Southern Europe. Something that is important here to underline, and it doesn't work as an excuse, but what you see in these slides is the result of bringing together different publications. Again, I'm not using only one textbook to give you these lectures. It's the result of many other of several research in academic journals, in European Union websites, Eurostat, and even in the CIA fact book is very helpful to characterize the countries. They always keep the data very up to date. So all have been challenging, for example, to integrate in such a graph countries from the Balkan region, for example. So having this comparison involving the Southern Europe behind the European Union member states such as Portugal, Spain, Greece, and Italy, all they have been indeed very challenging. Yet I'm still committed to bring some insights covering that part of Southern Europe. They also deserve necessarily an attention here in some of these domains, eventually the governance part, the economic part, and I will see how I can manage that towards February next year on the regional futures. So this was the scenario before or during the crisis 2007, 2008, with impact on 2009. And let's see now if we disentangle in the next minutes the four countries. I really would like to go through them. If I don't go, well, then I will bring them the next lecture. Portugal, turning point 1986, when Portugal integrated the European Union, or back in the days, European Community. Similar situation happened in the other three countries, and this turning point turning point certainly is a major anchor on the to understand the economic geography of Portugal nowadays. So by integrating the the European Community in 1986 means that they start following closely the principles of the European Community / the European Union, and these are related with the privatization of many of activities, privatization of some national companies within the water and waste management sector, for example, within the public transportation, bus, for example, or trains. So this led to the privatization of a number of services. Then later on, another turning point. So we are really embracing an evolutionary economic geography approach, the integration in the Economic and Monetary Union in 1999, and the beginning of the euro in 2002. And further on, everything in terms of in economic sense was going more or less well, with some recovery in Portugal, some stabilization in terms of the unemployment rate, and then also with a number of projects absorbing a lot of European Union funding. And then came the economic crisis in 2008, which then disrupted all the economic geography of Portugal and the other countries as the result. And then after, in the aftermath of this economic crisis, the EU/International Monetary Fund financial rescue package led to a number of structural changes. That's this overarching evolution of the economic landscape of Portugal in the period between 1986 and the current times. And these structural reforms in Portugal are still taking shape nowadays as we speak. Some of the labor, these structural reforms in the labor market actually came into force only last week. Some more flexibility in terms of not only teleworking, but also in terms of how people can change jobs, but also some legislation on giving some more security to some of the most precarious type of contracts in Portugal. So these structural reforms, they date back to the rescue package of 2011, but they are still taking shape currently as we speak. A number of structural changes in the education, in the housing market, with the goal of providing some sort of more sustainability to the housing market to make it more resilient towards future economic crisis. So this package, not only because of the money that they drop in the country, but also the requirements imposed / in agreement with the Portuguese government back in the days by the European Union and the IMF, led to a number of reforms across different sectors: energy markets, tendency to the liberalization, open of the telecommunications sector, the electricity and gas market, so privatization here. Also, modernization with some European money being canalized to improving the railway structure, for example, and the highway structure in the country. So the transportation sector also suffered a number of structural change, the telecommunication and postal service, with a very critical move here that was the privatization of the postal services in the country, and this still nowadays giving a lot of controversy and giving room to a lot of political debates in terms between the nationalization and / privatization of the postal services. And Portugal is often given as example of how well the country integrated these guidelines or these recommendations from this Troika, European Central Bank, European Union, and IMF. And the graph shows somehow an interesting transition here in terms of unemployment, and I drew I drew the line here in 2011 with the unemployment going skyrocket until the some years after the crisis, reaching a peak of almost 16% overall unemployment in the country around between 2013, 2014, and then here in 2011 came into force the package. It took some time. The same happens in Spain, Greece, and Italy. It took some time for these measures to really influence the ground, the economic activity in the ground, and then a decrease, a very significant increase in terms of the employment rate until 2018, the latest data provided by the International Monetary Fund. So and they point out in some sort of a summary that the political consensus that the Portuguese political parties were able to come up supported the recovery of the economy. So economic landscape, indeed, theory also underlines that is highly influenced by political arrangements that occurred somehow in the background of the economic activity. And there are many other theoretical domains here, the entrepreneurial state, that tells basically that the influence of the state or underlines the influence of the public government, of the state, in organizing the economic landscape. And there are a number of examples worldwide where the state played a role in the success of some of the largest corporations such as Apple and Tesla, for example. So, but then not that's will be a more theoretical lecture on economic geography at the global scale. So this package influenced mostly the labor reforms, and this led us to an increase in terms of productivity of the labor force. It boosted the tourism activity as well as the exports. Again, if you embrace a study on economic geography in Portugal in this period, and we embrace evolutionary perspective, then you will certainly need to also account for a more critical approach here. And I tend to underline that. And then indeed, for example, corruption is one of these domains. But here, with a boost of the tourism activity, a number of critics can be underpinned or pointed out here, because this boost of the tourism then resulted in, for example, privatization of many of the activities, and also led to a resettlement of historical neighborhoods, mainly in Lisbon and in Porto. Most of these old historic buildings, you probably visit some of these cities. The same occurs in Barcelona and Madrid, as well as in Italy, that the transformation of these historical buildings from residence, from housing, and some of them social housing, to host the tourism activity. And they enter these platforms of co-housing or co-living. Indeed, they in one hand, they support the tourism activity to suffer and exponentially grow in the country, but it's important to underline the social impacts of this boosting of the economic activity. It also boosts the exports, and here in terms of industry, mainly the exports related with the industry, they also benefited from a very supportive package from the European Union towards innovation and industrial activity. So some economic indicators, most of the GDP comes from the activity of services, then industry, and few from the agriculture. Again, I underline here the year 2011, and I drew the red line here, that the GDP went downwards from about 2007 to until 2011. Then it took again some time for these economic indicators to take shape here, and only in 2015 start growing more significantly, and with the prospects of continuing growing in the years to come. So these structural reforms, indeed, they take a long time to influence the performance of the economic activities, and these are the main sectors or the sectors contributing to this gross domestic product. And here again, the employments are more close up to the values, and the latest data shows that from 18%, that's a comparison here that I would like to underline, from 18% in 2013. It always depends, these indicators always depends of the source you are using. Here I'm using the International Monetary Fund founding data, from close to 18% in 2013 to 7%, really a strong recovery in terms of unemployment, and this is clearly visible in day-to-day basis in the country. In comparison to Spain, Portugal, to Spain, Italy, and Greece, the recovery in terms of GDP and in terms of unemployment is stronger in Portugal in comparison to the three other countries. And currently, the unemployment is about 6%, really one of the lowest unemployment rates since the beginning of the democracy in the country. And another component that became slightly improved after the economic package from these three entities is that doing business within the country became easier for the entities within the country and for foreigners trying to do business in the country. And this does not go along without some criticism. Some of the structural reforms led to, for example, an interesting package of what they call it, the gold visas, for example. So if a foreigner wanted to invest in the country about 100,000 euros or buy a property, they will benefit immediately from a gold visa, a permanent a permanent residence permit in the country. But then a number of scandals involving politicians and corruption in this regard led to the extinction of this golden visas scheme. Yet doing business within the country after 2011 became somehow easier. The requirements from these three entities in terms of structural reforms of the labor market and other sectors led to some openness to the economy, to foreign investment, which also led, in a positive side, to a stronger exports of different kind of products. And these are mainly the products or the goods produced in a country, along with the sector of the service, tourism and financial service. And the service, they absorb most of the labor force after the industry, and then agriculture. In terms of agriculture here, Portugal produces mainly milk, as in Spain, Greece and Italy is at the top. Tomatoes, olives, grapes, and these also they work as a final product, but also as an intermediary product for other industries, such as the transformation of commodity crops, such as potatoes or maize, for example. And in terms of industry, textiles, clothing, now with the impact from some funding schemes from the European Union for research and innovation, which I will underline later on in one of the lectures, they still play a strong role, mainly in the northern part of the country. Chemical industry still playing a role, and maybe less known to you, porcelain still play a role, and plastics, mainly molds. That is so we have some companies producing not the plastic itself, but the mold that then they export this mold to other countries, and then they will produce a final product based on plastic. Still, can, in terms of sustainability thinking, can lead to a lot of domains of research in this area. And of course, tourism still plays a fundamental role, not only in the southern part, the traditional tourism destination that is Algarve, but currently nowadays very strongly present in the northern part, mainly in the urban area of Porto and Lisbon. Again, this needs to be assessed through the lenses of some critical human geography, because the expansion of the tourism activity led to a resettlement of local communities from historical neighborhoods mainly, and also to an increase of prices in most of the traditional sectors, such as the gastronomy, essentially. And maybe less known to you that one of our main exports are cars or vehicle parts. Sometimes this is only about the textiles that they are used in the automobile sector, but We have one automobile factory in the southern part of Lisbon, here in the municipality of Setúbal. That's the Volkswagen Auto Europe. They are currently focused on producing only one type of a vehicle. So this is one of the main industries in the southern part of the country, and they recently benefited from a large financial package to secure it, to retain it in the country, supported through the European Union and the Portuguese government. Our main export partners are Spain, France, and Germany. And in terms of imports, curiously, we're still importing a lot of vehicles as well, oil, medicines, refined petroleum and natural gas, so mostly these fossil fuel energies. And the import partners are Spain, Germany, France, Italy, and the Netherlands. These are some of the clusters. When we are doing an analysis in terms of regional development or economic geography, it's important to look at the clusters. And although in theoretical terms, I will say that it's very controversial to call clusters these geographical locations of a number of activities, because based on my own experience in terms of research, they do not behave as a cluster should behave. So the knowledge exchange, the producing intermediary products to feed other industries, it doesn't happen straightforward as in many other clusters elsewhere in the world. So, but we have a number of clusters in the northern part, mainly focused on the textiles, leather, furniture, very important, and some of them they are now feeding IKEA, for example. We have the tourism essentially in the south, but also with agriculture playing a role. We have the automotive or automobile industry in the southern part of Lisbon, as I underline here. We have the porcelain or ceramic tiles in the center of the country, and of course other agriculture within in the countryside, mainly regarding wine production. Some of examples here, a little bit messy slide for you to have an idea. I don't know if you probably hear about this. Navigate. It is one of the largest pulp and paper industries in the world, and they are located in the center of the country. The countryside mainly produces agricultural crops and chestnuts. They play a fundamental role in the economy of the northern countryside, essentially here at the border with Spain, not only as a final product, but as an intermediary product for other industries such as cosmetics. They are now investing in using local resources, and this aligns with the European Union place-based policy. They are using local resources to support the local economies. Textile in the north, wine along the Douro River, as well as in this Alentejo region. Shipbuilding here in the extreme north in Viana do Castelo as well. Of course, natural tourism in Madeira and Açores, the two only autonomous regions of the country, and the beach tourism, sun and sea tourism in the southern part of the country, along with some agricultural activities as well. A focus here before entering before entering Spain, some difference in terms of the economic geography of the two metropolitan areas, Lisbon and Porto. While in Lisbon, the services dominate economic geography, with some of the largest corporations in the country being located or having their headquarters in Lisbon. This is quite typical of a centralized government structure, such as Portugal. Most of the largest corporations are located in Lisbon. So Lisbon's essentially economic geography is characterized by services, from financial service to tourism activity. And some of these are the main exporters in the country, mainly the refined oil from the Portuguese this Portuguese company Galp, the telecommunications as well. In Porto, slightly different. There are a number of industries located in the greater area of Porto, or in the metropolitan area of Porto. Is centrally focused on the still partly in the services, and some of the largest companies with largest industries, they are located in the surrounding area of Porto, very much focused on the textile, furniture, and footwear as well, and porcelains and tiles, along with also providing services to other industries. Trying to get a grasp still within the economic geography of Spain, and the other two will remain for the next lecture before the European Union integration, which still plays a fundamental role also on the economic geography of Spain. And here the CIA World Fact Book brings that as a turning point the crisis in 2008 and everything else that happens after that, the financial struggles and the problems in recovering from the crisis of 2008, a crisis essentially resulted from the disruption within the banking sector, as you probably are very well aware of. Same type of behaviors if you compare to Portugal, high rates in terms of the employment between 20 with a dramatic increase after 2005, reaching it at 26%. You remember Portugal was 26% employment rate in about 2013, and then with some recovery taking place, and also bringing the unemployment to a lower level, being currently about 15% in 2018, 15%, slightly higher or considerably higher in comparison to the 7%/8% registered in Portugal nowadays. So turning point. Also turning points in the economic landscape, the integration in the European Community in 1986 as well, along with Portugal, and then the economic crisis in 2007, 2008, with a recovery period that still very much ongoing. They also impose some implemented some structural reforms in the labor sector. Mainly, they reached some increase in terms of labor productivity. They reached some low inflation in some of their goods, and they also have seen their exports competitiveness increase significantly. An interesting aspect here, and I haven't underlined the regional differences in Portugal because it's very difficult to have regional economic indicators at the regional level, or I will need much more time and only one model to prepare these regional indicators graphs for the regions in Portugal. But in Spain, you can find some literature underlining the regional differences, and you can see in terms of employment rate, not unemployment, employment rate, you still see the importance of the urbanized areas of Madrid, Catalonia, and Navarra, here in the border with the Pyrenees in France, how well they perform in comparison to the other autonomous communities in the country. So this also justifies very much all these political clashes involving the referendum in Catalonia and the aftermath of that inquire to the population. So we have here the employment rates with a lot of variations through the time, but what I wanted to underline is these regional differences in Spain. So when we have a territory, and here there's a gap here, this means 2000, when we have regions somehow well defined as these autonomous communities in Spain, having such a data in terms characterizing economic activities is it favors an economic geography analysis. And here something I also found interesting to analyze is that the Catalonia accounts for 1/5 of Spain's economy, and this source here, then I always try to underline here, the source is very important, and for your studies later on, they tell that its GDP, the GDP of Catalonia, is slightly larger than the GDP of Portugal. So for those that are less familiar with this regional economic geography of Southern Europe, in this case the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain, you see how important Catalonia is in the context of regional development in Spain. They have played the similar role than Madrid. So most of the critical comments that have been broadcast by different media underlines the economic importance of Catalonia in terms of economic performance of the overall Spain, similar to the one that Madrid has. And the fears were that the independence of Catalonia all lead also to different calls from other autonomous communities to seek also independence from the central government located in Madrid. So, and here the interesting element when we are studying regional geography is that we cannot only look to territorial governance as in one container and forget this planning. We cannot talk about economic geography without understanding the regional geography in terms of governance and how the territories are organized. So everything is very much interlinked. And in this context, we have this supranational entity, the European Union, now somehow influencing spatial planning, influencing the governance, and to some extent also influencing the economic landscape through mainly the support of some with some economic package. And here they, similar to Portugal, the services they are the largest sector contributing to the GDP. And I would like to finish this by underlining, using the 5 slides to underline somehow the a more future-oriented perspective. And he underlines that places Spain as in the position 53 in terms of GDP contribution, or in terms of GDP in the worldwide context, between Slovenia and Estonia. Nothing specific or nothing spectacular here to underline in such a study. It's interesting to underline that Spain plays a fundamental role in feeding the food systems of Spain, of the Iberian Peninsula, as well as the European Union. In terms of agriculture, they produce milk, olives, grapes, tomatoes, and a lot of mainly a lot of different types of fruit. From the industry, they play a role in the textile sector, shipbuilding, the automobile, tourism plays a fundamental role, mainly in the southern parts of the country, and as well as other manufacturers and chemical industry. And in terms of exports, their main exports are cars or vehicle parts, similar to Portugal, medicines as well, delivery trucks, that is and then a very interesting point here in this regard. And they host one of the largest corporations in the textile and garment or clothing industry in the world, that is Inditex, located in Galicia, just sorry, I forgot the name now. Is located in the northern part of Galicia. The city is Coruña, or close to Coruña, and they play a fundamental role in terms of exports in the country. In terms of imports, they import mainly non-renewable resources, and they trade essentially with Germany, France, China, and Italy. And they have 8 large refineries, that's places or industry transforming brute oil into a final product, into a final resource for the industrial, automobile, and heating systems. And these are their specific locations, mostly benefiting from the geographical location in the close to the sea, very similar to what's happening elsewhere in the country. And this map underlines the main tourism destinations. All the communities are divided in tourism destinations, which also reflects very much the importance of the tourism activity. The sea and sand tourism, or beach tourism, in the southern part in the Mediterranean coast, with the different tourism destinations here, and they have stronger autonomy in terms of tourism promotion and investment attraction. We have more rural tourism in the northern part of the country, and it's certainly this San James path, Camino de Santiago, plays a very relevant role in the economic landscape of the smaller communities, small and medium-sized towns along the way of this San James path, Camino de Santiago, from the Basque Country to Santiago de Compostela here in Galicia. In terms of forward future thinking of the economic geography, a number of research now is essentially focused on what's next. So they are placed already. They have a strong competitiveness in those domains, in those exports, and they are also now within this large plan to attract gigafactories in terms gigafactories for the manufacture of electrical vehicles, and all of these autonomous communities, they are now competing to attract companies to their territories. And interestingly here, that's Portugal is out of these discussions. There's no such a discussion in Portugal, and this discussion is going on in other countries in Europe, but they try to attract different type of business. So I see some interesting cooperation in terms of economic landscape here, as these provinces, they are trying to attract different types of I don't know, in technical terms, I cannot define this very well, but I see that some of them, they are trying to attract some specific, the manufacturing of electric vehicles. Others, they are trying to develop the batteries itself. So, but all of them are in the race to attract these gigafactories, and these are the main enterprises playing a role in these autonomous communities, in terms of position themselves in these more sustainable economic activity, still controversial, of the use of the batteries, because the lithium is required, and lithium comes from mining, and mostly of these minings are located in sub-Saharan Africa. So these questions of power relations between developed societies of the north and the low-income countries of the south is still is important to take into account when discussing the evolution of economic geography of a territory such as this one here in Spain, and the embracing of this gigafactory supporting the electrical vehicles. And this is a discussion that is going on also in other European countries, with already some established gigafactories. You probably have heard about the Tesla gigafactory in Berlin is already in operation, and there are also other gigafactories, and in Southern Europe only Italy and Spain are playing a card in this regarding. Portugal and Greece, they remain out of this discussion. And then we'll continue with Italy and Greece, wrap up on the next lecture, which then will pave the way to talk about European Union integration and founding schemes. So I hope you have enjoyed the lecture, and I can stay here with some more minutes for some of your questions if you have. If you don't have any questions at the moment, if you have them later, reach out to me via email. Okay. So thank you so much for holding on this live lecture, and thank you to those that are listening later. And hopefully you are still enjoying this regional geography of Southern Europe. I've been doing my best to bring up-to-date data here to illustrate what is going on down there. So see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.